All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of season 2 of Into the Metaverse. This is going to be yet another terrific conversation. Today, we are diving into one of the world's biggest NFT metaverse apps with Saro McKenna, the CEO of Dacoco and AlienWorlds. Just to familiarize our audience with Saro and her work, AlienWorlds is an NFT metaverse where you can play with unique digital items, among other things. Players stake Trillium, which is an ERC20 token, to planets, and then enable players to vote in upcoming planetary election. It all sounds very exciting, as well as to increase the planet's reward pool. The planets themselves have DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where players participate in weekly elections for council candidates, submit proposals on how to distribute the planetary treasury, or even run for planetary council. And it all happens virtually. There's a lot more to it. Welcome, Sarah. We're so excited to welcome you today on the podcast. Before we dive in, we just have a short announcement to share from our friends at Roundhill Investments.
This podcast is brought to you by Roundhill Investments, the advisor to the Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF. The Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF, which trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol METV, is the largest dedicated metaverse fund in the United States. The ETF tracks an index developed by Ball Metaverse Research Partners, a metaverse-focused indexing and research company headed by industry expert Matthew Ball. For a prospectus and more information, please visit roundhillinvestments.com/ETF/METV. Read carefully. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. Distributor Foreside Fund Services, LLC. Awesome. So diving right into it, Sarah, we have kind of a standard first question that we like to pose to each guest as we go through the podcast series. We've spoken to a lot of the brightest minds from various aspects of the metaverse, whether that's people building virtual worlds, people building technology, investors. It's really helped to bring together a consensus as to just what the heck this metaverse thing is, because that term seems to get thrown around quite loosely. So, to you and your colleagues at AlienWorlds, we'd really like to know, how do you define the metaverse? What is the metaverse to you? And as we like to say, is almost more important, what is the metaverse not as well?
Yeah, such a good question. And you're right that this definition is something that I guess we're all kind of looking at from different angles. And I don't think that we've settled collectively on a single definition. So my definition is it's a digital space where peer-to-peer interaction happens within a single environment. Okay, so digital space, that's fairly obvious. That's just distinguishing it from the physical space that we're in, where peer-to-peer actions happen. So what this is describing is the co-ownership of the metaverse through tokenized assets, in contradistinction to Web 2, allowing for really different business models, right? When you don't have the platform owner kind of owning what's valuable in the space, but instead what's valuable is dispersed, then you get this amazing activity and all of this ingenuity, both in terms of content, but also in terms of business models, services, goods, NFTs, and so on. So the peer-to-peer interactions happening within a single environment. Sometimes this concept of persistent environment comes up. So there has to be something stable that is there, and in a sense that has to have a boundary, right? Otherwise, it's not really meaningful versus what is outside of it. In our case, what we conceptualize that as being is Trillium, our fungible token, and everything that it touches. So everything that Trillium touches, that you can use it for, that people are using it for, describes the boundary of our metaverse. And in that way, every time especially through interoperability and technical implementations, we sort of expand the metaverse outward. So we run on 3 chains, Wax, Ethereum, and the Binance Smart Chain. So in that sense, we expanded the metaverse and the token, Trillium, out into these different chains. We've also created a Minecraft extension, a Minecraft implementation by modding Minecraft servers. So again, that's an extension of the metaverse outward. So a metaverse has the concept of a boundary, and pushing that boundary out becomes really significant for anyone that's building a metaverse. I'll say that what I think a metaverse is not is a space So it is a digital space and it is a persistent space, but it doesn't have to be a space digitally built out in 3D, AR, or VR to me. That's the user interface layer. And I love AR and VR. It's not something that we're currently building within the company. It's something that we can definitely plug into in the course of our roadmap. But to me, that's the user interface. And it also changes over time. You know, that technology is evolving rapidly. Whereas the blockchain structure is immutable, permanent. Those smart contracts keep running, even if, you know, a founding team eventually is no longer sort of driving the project, but it's been decentralized and handed over to the community, for example. So, I mean, you might need some maintenance of those smart contracts, but they can keep going, right? There isn't a sort of singular entity that needs to continue to maintain that. So that to me is the space concept. It's the space that is created collectively by the co-owners of the system, the tokens that they own and the ways that they're using those tokens. And the AR or VR implementation, or the way of thinking about a space like that, is a really interesting and valuable layer, but to me it's not core to the definition of what a metaverse is. In part because it's sort of age, that will evolve and I will possibly might age more rapidly, whereas the blockchain construction to me is much more, has more longevity and more value associated with it.
I think you hit on a couple key points. You know, one of the things you just hit on at the end there was, you know, separating the discussion of devices and access from what is the metaverse, the experiences. And I think that's something that we're passionate about, both Yon and I. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are confusing maybe the wrong word, but, you know, utilizing the term metaverse, you know, as a VR experience, and just kind of that's synonymous to them. And I think it's really important, particularly with what Facebook Meta is doing and how, at least for now, their vision of the metaverse is constrained to a VR headset and Oculus. You know, I think it's really important to separate those two factors out. You know, if we look at the internet over the last 30 years, it's evolved from being peer-to-peer based to then being, you know, internet based on desktop PCs, to being notebook PCs and laptops, to now being smartphones and tablets and mobile devices, and even, you know, my watch on my wrist. And so, you know, separating out that is really important. Another thing you hit on that I think was really important and I think underpins a lot of what's happening, and this is something that Yon has been really passionate about, is you explicitly called out early on in your definition the social aspect of it, the interaction between people, the peer-to-peer relationship that's really built into it. And I think that's one of the driving forces. At the end of the day, this is, as Yon has said a lot, this is a social movement in the digital world. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that is in fact the key thing, right? Is being able to recognize, like, is this just being called a metaverse, but fundamentally contains the same ownership mechanics, business models, monetization, you know, mechanisms as a Web 2 platform? If it is, then that's probably just the term being applied because it's really in vogue, you know. A metaverse that really has peer-to-peer, the capacity for owners to engage in a peer-to-peer way built in, will also have attendantly radically different business models, because there is no one singular platform owner that is standing at the crossroads and controlling all the profit, right? And so that's a good test, honestly, of whether something's really a metaverse or not. Is there the capacity for the co-owner? Well, firstly, is the system co-owned by multiple, you know, stakeholders? And I mean widely held, not just a few. And is there really the capacity, and perhaps even is it really happening, that people are monetizing that co-ownership position bilaterally and in a peer-to-peer way, you know? And if not, then it might just be the case that it's really a Web 2 platform that's decided to create a more immersive experience, for example, but that isn't really changing the fundamental relationship between the participants of the system, which I do think is key to it being, to that term metaverse really being applied. I think immersive, to me, is the impact that it's having on people's lives because of the co-ownership model that it's creating, and the fact that it's an immersive place where we can get a lot of our needs met, we can offer a lot of things in, we can communicate. It doesn't need to be immersive just in a sort of visual sense by putting on a headset. That's too thin a requirement in a sense. This goes a lot beyond that.
You know, one of the things that I'm really curious about is the way the organizational construct of the people and organization that are building, shaping, and facilitating the metaverse is going to look like, right? For example, what I mean is there is the metaverse and what it means for the users, but then there is also the back office of who is building it, who is managing it, who is leading it. And I think we're still very much, despite the emergence of DAOs, we're still very much living in a world where it's the typical corporation model, right? Which there are investors, there are shareholders, and then there is a small layer of executive team that really dictate the evolution of a certain platform or a certain product. Where do you think we are in the cycle of how much for a true metaverse platforms to emerge, how much do they need to be also managed and led by distributed organizations, right? We all know that there is now decentralized autonomous organization, and of course token provide an opportunity, but DAOs are very, very early stage, and it will take a long time, I believe, for DAOs to really emerge as a managerial concept that is sustainable and scalable. How long do you think we're going to go until we see a metaverse that is also managed and led in a decentralized way? And how much do you think that's even applicable in the near term, where the world of corporation has historically been shaped by the DNA of a typical corporation?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. In a sense, that's both a sort of very abstract but also a very practical question, right? Because in a tokenized system where lots of people own the token alongside the founding team, it has to be run by the people who own that token. Otherwise, it's a very thin development model, and it probably won't be a successful project, and it certainly won't reach that kind of scale that you need to then have a sort of self-perpetuating system where there's enough liquidity, for example, and kind of price discovery and activity can be liquid enough that it's a sort of self-sustaining model for a long time. So I think, if the tokens that describe the metaverse are widely enough held and sufficient scale has been achieved, then actually you will see the emergence of different people in the metaverse bringing it forward. Now, it doesn't have to be so in our case, for example, we as the founding team still control certain smart contracts, but they're very minimal. They're just the token supply, the inflationary algorithms, and so on. But the rest of the community really is creating the rest of the metaverse. So they're using those tokens to run their own competitions. They're using those tokens then to run on the DAOs. They're using everything that we've built and put into the world to connect with each other, to find community members, to promote their groups. They run their own Telegram and Discord channels. They've created their own websites. There's even a company that has a whole division. It's actually a Bitcoin mining company that has a whole division just servicing AlienWorlds, and it does that by reading chain data and offering various drops and so on. So right from the kind of more highly technically adept end of the scale, like what I just described, this Bitcoin miner that can run a lot of nodes and get data out and run services, all the way down to the very low tech end of the scale where people are just using Twitter, for example, to run a promotion or a contest using the NFTs, but they're still having to get lists of addresses and do little mini airdrops. It might be very, very manual at that point, but there's still, that behavior is emerging because they're owners of the system together. So they actually have, like, for example, those people running those little Twitter competitions might be landowners who are trying to attract people onto the land, or might be running for governance on one of the DAOs. So, so to answer your question, it's still early stage, right? A lot of this stuff is still happening at a smaller level than, company law, which has existed for centuries. But it's a product of the co-ownership of the tokens. And it doesn't just have to be, like in our case, the competitive DAOs within the metaverse haven't been released to community governance yet, but that hasn't stopped these co-owners of the system from self-governing. And there are different power centers in the metaverse offering their own activity. And so when you say kind of bringing the project forward, I think, we have to understand what even a project like this consists of, right? There's the tokens, and as I mentioned, we still control some of the smart contracts of the tokens, but that's not really the project. The metaverse itself is bigger than just the smart contracts governing the tokens, right? And that really is already in community hands and is being taken forward by the community. That doesn't actually have to be formalized in a DAO. It can just be occurring and then over time can become formalized. I mean, listen, don't get me going on the trajectory of DAOs, because this is what we've lived and breathed this for years, which is how we ended up this point. So we started building DAOs at the time we called them DACs in 2018, the same code base actually as we use now for our competitive DAOs that are game objects within the game itself. And I mean, I even got paid directly from the smart contracts of this DAC for over a year. So I completely know what it's like to actually be a worker inside of an early DAC. And what we discovered, at that time was that because there's no native recognition of DACs or DAOs, as entities like companies anywhere in the world yet. I think there's a few jurisdictions looking at that, like Wyoming and possibly I think Gibraltar and Malta were looking at that at the time. But because there's no native recognition of a DAO within a sort of company or trust or charity law kind of structure, you can't sort of transact externally as the DAO and keep your members safe according to liability and so on. So it is still handy to have a company structure in some cases. And I think it will also be really interesting when governments start to recognize DAOs as entities that can confer like liability in the same way as a company does, like with sort of limitation of liability and so on. So that process will happen where governments start to be able to understand a DAO as like a native construct. And then I think we'll see a big evolution forward once the law catches up with this field and then people are able to do work within DAOs, like with greater financial value or more risk or whatever, which currently they might not want to do. So I think the law will keep up. And then I think the other thing that we're all kind of learning is the sort of, I think of it sometimes as like the social technology around DAOs. Like, how do you coordinate in a flat structure like that, right? Because DAOs have no singular authority, right? They are the token holders who then, in our case, vote for custodians. We have delegated democracy within our DAOs rather than like direct democracy where people are voting for each resolution, because we think that leads to better decisions and more like management of the DAO. So people are voting for the custodians. This kind of that trajectory of a DAO and working together without a singular authority structure of authority is something that we're learning how to do. And whether you have a small team taking something forward or a more dispersed team learning how to work together without necessarily the management structures that we inherit from companies is certainly something that we're all learning at the same time. And by the way, many of the same structures replicate themselves. Like, it still really works to work as part of a team. It still really works to have somebody coordinating work streams, right? But the cash flows can be done programmatically through the DAO. So you can have a unit of people going forward to request a worker proposal and then them getting paid into one single account and then them paying each other that way, for example. So, I think the social structures around working kind of seem to replicate how we've always liked to work in teams and get stuff done and coordinate within groups. But then how that work gets recognized by a DAO and how the payments get made and so on can be handled through smart contract by the DAO and its workers.
I think that was really interesting how you kind of broke all that down. And part of the time I was thinking about, there's a lot of talk recently. We spoke about it on our first episode of season 2 about Yuga Labs and how they raised money. And they recently just did the land sale for their NFT metaverse that they're working on. And, I'm going to go negative here for a second. I kind of thought they had a little bit of a cop out when they were like, when they drove up gas fees on Ethereum because they were doing the minting. And then they kind of just said, oh, we'll bring it up with the DAO. Like, that kind of seems like a cop out. Like, you kind of knew what was going to happen. And so it kind of does bring back to what you were getting at. I think maybe if you could just kind of, more directly address it. But, you have these traditional corporation structures overseeing platforms that also have DAOs. And, it seems to me that at least in the early stages of building this stuff, we need both. We need some centralized direction to actually build this stuff and get it off the ground and get it to work. And then as this evolution occurs and as these platforms mature, I think you alluded to that, more and more of the decision making can be pushed to a more decentralized organization. But, you talked about, so you guys are like 5 years into this or so, and it's still pretty early days. I mean, we're still very early on in building these virtual worlds, these virtual platforms, but, how you think about, slowly over time transitioning the balance of power away from centralized corporations to DAOs.
Yeah. And the first thing is that tends to happen through the token distribution, right? So in our case, the tokens are being earned in the game all the time. So naturally, more of the tokens are going out into the hands of players and are being more widely held. So it's actually true, just even from an economic sense, that we're losing control all the time, right, in favor of the community taking more control. And that happens because of inflation and the play to earn mechanism. So yeah, I think the tokens are one good way of that decentralization occurring gradually over time. But the other thing is that I think it's worth looking at like the bits of a system that can be retained within some kind of central control and the parts of it that don't need to be. That's kind of more how I think of it than that necessarily. So there's both a time mechanism where control is ceded from the founding team, for example, to the community. But I think there's also a thing where, like in our case, the community just does control much of the metaverse because nobody else is controlling it. I mean, so the metaverse isn't like just a user interface, for example. It's the sum total of what everybody's doing, all of the activity. It's a bit like a city or, a place. So we're not controlling it, nor could we. I mean, it would be like once the tokens are owned by other people and they're economically incentivized and they have the tools like the NFTs themselves to do things, to create their own games, to interact with each other, to create their own competitions, they're just doing that. There would be nothing that I could do to prevent that apart from anything else, right? And then there are little slices of the metaverse that Dacoco, the founding company, does still control, like I mentioned, the smart contracts over certain things and so on. So I think it's worth sort of parsing, like, until you're in something like this, it looks like one monolithic thing, and then you ask, what's the degree of control or decentralization or whatever. But once you're in it, I think you can see that there are defined little things that might stay within control of any given party for X period of time. But there's, at least in our case, a lot of it that really is under community control because the tokens are fairly widely held. And that's, I think, also why scale matters. So a lot of the projects that you've mentioned, especially because of the early background of mini DAOs being on Ethereum, where you just didn't get much user activity, but you could get some high valuations, but not a lot of people. I think that also contributed to this kind of there not being a lot of different people adding value to the system and creating so whereas we reside our gaming logic on another blockchain, it's called Wax, and in our case we have very low transaction fees, very easy modular structures to create DAOs because of the way that the code works. So we really do get, I think, a lot more community participation because there's lower barriers to entry. Or NFTs are not very expensive, for example, so you don't really need those kind of guild type rental models and so on. So I think that those earlier systems did kind of lend themselves a little bit more to hyper dedicated like founding teams and then a little bit of ghost town around it. And I think that is possibly a little bit because of the technology and also just the nascent kind of degree of maturity of the communities around them. And I think over time, we're just seeing that evolve and fill out so that the community is more active.
Saro, a great segue from that point is the fact that kind of until now, most NFT games or spaces have been largely attracting crypto natives, users who are used to utilizing multiple currencies, moving assets between platforms, between wallets, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to expand the user base, we believe at least to, let's start with 100 million, let alone 1 billion plus, we will most likely need to kind of not only ease the on-ramps and the onboarding into those platforms, but also make it truly seamless, as seamless as the web and mobile applications have become. And so, how do you think about making those on-ramps easier, and especially in the context of AlienWorlds? And of course, if you have a wider overview or a point of view on that, both in terms of like the onboarding, but also in terms of the accessibility. And I think you just talked about the price of entry, and to your kind of, I think we would both tag along to your point of view that the Web3 and the metaverse cannot be something that only people who can shell $1,000 or $10,000 into NFTs and lands are going to be able to participate. Otherwise, it's going to be a very small and lonely metaverse. And so both on the onboarding and then also on the affordability of getting into the metaverse, what is the AlienWorlds kind of strategy? And maybe if you have a wider point of view on the wider space.
Yeah, sure. So we have always selected our blockchain strategy so as to be most appropriate for the user given what they would need to do on that chain. So, for example, our gaming logic is on a chain wax with low transaction fees. At the time when we resided it there, it was actually completely free to set up an account, and that account would have all of the resources that you would need to do the first gaming actions for a really long time. So it was completely free onboarding, which at the time I think was the only platform where you could have that. And so that was one of the reasons why, we were able to gain traction. I mean, we were the first blockchain game, for example, to exceed 100,000 users, and then 500,000 users, and then 1 million users, and we're now at 7 million plus lifetime users. So yes, that selection of technology made a big difference. But equally, our token residing on the BSC chain and also on Ethereum is really important for people to be able to hold the token on the chain that they want to, for especially higher value assets or for larger holdings. So I think, the right technology for the right reason is important, and, being able to build out that tech makes a big difference. So, having the ability to, and I mean, for example, the Minecraft implementation was also a big technical undertaking. So yeah, I mean, nothing really beats just putting in that technical groundwork to be able to give your users a good experience on the chain that they want, or, for the right functionality. In terms of onboarding and ease of onboarding, this is just going to keep happening, right? So, everyone's working on that essentially, and we are too, with the selection of our chain strategy, ensuring that we can continue to provide a really great experience for users, especially around the resources that the chain provides. So this is something that we're looking extremely carefully at and investing a lot in, ensuring that we have the right logic on the right chain that will be really, really cheap and easy for people to use. So we're investing time in that, but so is everybody else. And I think this technology is just going to continue to become easier for people to get on board with. I do think that it's important that as we consider those things, we do, though, ensure that we don't just replicate the points of centralization of the past. I do think that it's really significant that people understand that it's really empowering for them to hold their own keys, for example, and if a user doesn't want to do that, I think that's completely legitimate, and they can get a wallet solution that, holds their keys and can sign transactions and stuff without, and that can do password recovery and so on without them needing to worry about that. But I think there are some users that might want to retain that autonomy. I mean, we saw Justin Trudeau shutting down bank accounts within the last year, right? And not allowing people to access their funds. I think that in that kind of situation, in a country that you would never expect that of, So I think that in that kind of context, it is still useful for people to at least know that there's an option whereby they can have their own keys and have more autonomy and sovereignty. So I think that there's still a place for optionality and choices for people around onboarding. I think ease of onboarding is one thing, but security, sovereignty, autonomy, and education also has a place. And so I think having those different options is useful. I mean, in fact, I love the fact that we've founded this massive game, this massive application with millions of users, and we can actually help to teach people about these concepts. That's a huge part of what we're doing with AlienWorlds, is teaching people about DAOs, teaching people about blockchain technology, teaching people about how to securely hold their assets, teaching people that they're responsible for their own actions, and that it's really important that they are educated and empowered. So I think education's huge. I would prefer that we not follow a totally sort of paternalistic kind of model of, we'll just take care of everything and you can just trust us, because I don't think systems like that tend toward corruption, as we've seen. So yeah, there's a balancing act, but certainly teaching people is important.
I do want to say, as not only as observer, in this space, but also as a builder in this space. Philosophically, I absolutely echo what you're saying about the sovereign individual. And, I've read the book and maybe others as well, which is kind of funny. After 20 something years, now is kind of the time that this book is actually becoming more relevant.
Yeah.
Even though it was written in like 1996. And so I totally echo what you're saying, and very much in favor of that, giving people control of their assets, teaching them how to do that. I do think it's counter to the way technology has evolved and has taught a whole generation on the simplicity of living life. Passwords are hosted, right? It's kind of going counter to that. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I just think that level of sovereignty translated to everyday behavior and simplicity of using tools will take a long time. And ultimately, yes, while I think the magic will happen, in my opinion, where that sovereignty of owning my assets and knowing how to deal with all of the things that are required to protect my assets, when that meets ease of use, and when I don't need to think about what blockchains I'm on, what wallets I use, right? There is a true kind of metaverse consistency. And I think that will take years and years and years to happen. But I do believe there's going to be an inflection point. I don't know if it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when we're going to cross a certain amount of people, maybe north of 100 million, who are the first people to really exist in a metaverse where those things are simple to do, they're easy to control, easy to manage, and we fully are on board with why are we doing it, right? Why this is important for us, just like we've learned about the importance of managing our bank accounts and taking control of our passwords. I just think that is a consumer journey that is going to take a little while. And funnily enough, a lot of that education will come from game worlds like AlienWorlds, which I think is fascinating.
No, exactly. I mean, that's actually kind of why we put our whole philosophy of a DAO and NFTs into a game, was precisely because it's a much easier way to get people kicking the tires on the tech, and actually using it, because that's what we need, is people using this technology, not just sitting on the sidelines wondering what it is. We need people in there building it, breaking it, using it. And that's why a game is a great way for this to happen. And it was totally part of why we did it in the first place. But yes, I do agree that it's a little bit counter to what people have become habituated to. But remember, of course, that's Web 2. Like, people have also become habituated to like not owning their data, and I don't think they like it. I think they'd quite like an alternative, but so yeah, this exact thing happens pretty much every day in my working life, where I'm sort of, because I'm living within a Web3 thing, right? We've built this metaverse, but then we're constantly interfacing with, like, for example, how much do you protect IP, for example? I mean, I'm in favor of people using, IP, so that then we can grow the metaverse and they can feel part of the metaverse. And whereas a sort of more traditionalist view would be you strictly protect IP, so these are the types of business decisions that you have to make. And that's a Web 2 or even a pre-Web 2 kind of construct around property rights and intellectual property and stuff, that you're then kind of transitioning forward into a business model that actually might make more sense to have a different perspective, or similarly, when we announced our Minecraft implementation, this technical bridge into Minecraft, our PR guys were kind of trying to say, well, is this a collab with Minecraft? Like, is there like a corporate partnership here with Microsoft? And we were saying, well, no, we don't have a signed agreement with that company, but that's what's cool about this. We didn't need that, right? You can mod those servers. We can credentialize into a blockchain account. You can play AlienWorlds in Minecraft, and there was no corporate partnership needed for that. This is pure technical interoperability, and this is what, the expansion of the metaverse can really look like. And I'm not sure that we were actually even able to get that message fully across. I think if we'd been able to say AlienWorlds times Minecraft announcing a thing, we would have gotten a lot more traction now. But you wait 6-12 months, because we've both been through this before, right? Where I was talking about the metaverse when everybody's got, in fact, lots of things, DAOs, NFTs, the metaverse, when nobody understood that stuff. And lo and behold, even just a few months later, I think people still don't understand it, but at least they pretend to now, right? You don't just get the absolutely blank stares.
That's why we're doing these podcasts and inviting people, like you, Sarah, so we can really inform and educate, because I think both Matthew and myself obviously are deep believers in this is happening. This is about a human behavior shift that will take time. And there's never been a better format than a virtual world, the game world. And yes, I can totally appreciate the fact that probably 99% of people that have read the press release about your Minecraft integration were searching for that formal collaboration with Microsoft and what does it all mean, because people need to anchor into templates that they understand, and that's okay. Our job as innovators and disruptors is to build a reality and onboard people into the reality, very similar to what Elon Musk has been spending the last 15 years of his life, educating the world that electric vehicles and reusable rockets, this is the way to accomplish sustainability and exploration of space, right?
Yeah. It's such an interesting question. Like, how do we bridge that gap? Because what's happening is we are building something completely novel and new, but we need to use probably the vocabulary and the conceptual framework that already, is established in people's minds to help them understand what these new kind of structures are and what they can give to them and why they're beneficial in their lives. And yet when we use the old vocabulary, we also kind of seed what's special about it in a way. You do lose something in that. So, but that's just the nature of this period, this kind of liminal time where it's going to take a while before people fully get into this model of co-ownership and understanding what that gives them. And humans are so adaptable. I mean, I'm sure that we will get there, look how quickly it's become the case that you can, like, our email addresses, for example, are now almost more important than our physical home addresses, and yet when you first set up your email address, you didn't think, like XYZ79 or whatever was going to be a really significant email address in your life, right? You just kind of created it. And now it's like how you log into every single thing of value in your life, and probably if you were to die, the people in your life should know how to access those things, for example, whereas before they would just have been able to get your mail in the door. So these are really significant changes that have happened in just the way we operate in the last 15, 20 years. And I think it's going to be the exact same transposition into Web3. And we're just going to have to go on that journey together.
It's so funny. Maybe a reminder to anyone who is doing estate planning, make sure to add your email password so someone could actually access your email if something, God forbid, happens.
I'm sure there's a whole area of law around this now, because yes, exactly.
And your wallet, all your crypto wallets as well.
Yeah, for sure.
We couldn't ignore the elephant in the room right now, which is financial markets. And I know you came from the financial services industry, so maybe put on your financial analyst hat for a little bit again. The crypto markets are always volatile, but it's been a rough patch the last couple of weeks. It's not unique to crypto. It's obviously risk assets broadly. Crypto is a part of that. But does what's happening in the crypto markets affect at all what you guys are doing? How do you think about what's happening, and what does this mean for kind of where we are in the development of Web3 based metaverse platforms? Just kind of your thoughts on how those tie together.
Yeah, I actually don't spend a lot of energy looking at prices. Obviously, I'm aware, of what's been happening in the last kind of week or so. But as someone who's just building, and I've been through a couple of these cycles, I've just learned that it's better not to worry too much about it. I mean, there's nothing I can do to control these big forces. And I know that what we're building has value. And it's actually just better to focus on what I can productively do and control, which is my day job, And, a trillium is still a trillium. You can still use it to stake into the DAOs to vote. It gives you, one vote on a DAO, and our NFTs are still usable in the game, and they allow you to connect with other people, and they allow you to find your community and to do things across the metaverse. So that's really my kind of like way of coping with working in such an environment where the goalposts do move. It's really working on the technology and working on giving the community what they need. honestly, like downturns are also like, they can kind of like take the pressure out literally, and then we can all just focus on building again. And then it's another exciting ride when everything picks up in the next, so yeah, that's my perspective on those cycles. And in terms of the metaverse's place within that, I really do see the metaverse, as I've kind of said a few times now, as a story about decentralization and blockchain technology and the assets that power that and the co-ownership. So, none of that is really price related. And if anything, when prices are higher, we get big influxes into the ecosystem, and we then just that's another generation of people to educate and to teach about the technology and everything. So it's good. It comes in waves, and we digest it and grow, and our community grows in that way.
I think that's really sage advice. It's I wrote a blog post on our Substack into meta. Our Substack, you can get the link, but it kind of I was doing it from the stock perspective, looking at like Roblox and Unity, but it's very similar. It's, we go through these hype cycles. Yona and I talked about at the beginning of the year, we're both very excited for when the hype cycle deflates, because that's when the builders can actually build and get away from just people throwing, when I was working at Bloomberg, I was looking at company transcripts, earnings transcripts, and, we were going up exponentially every quarter, the number of companies mentioning the term metaverse. And it just gets to the point where they're just doing lip service to it, and there's no substance behind it. And so now that, the hype is coming out, whether it's stock prices, whether it's crypto prices, whether it's just, okay, we kind of got through it and now we're realizing we have a long way to get there. Now we can focus on building. And that's really what's exciting. And this is going to be a decade or more until we realize this true vision of the metaverse that people are building to. But, now that we're past kind of the peak hype, we can really focus on that. And that's what excites me the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
I echo that, and very excited to be building, especially now when there is that sort of disillusionment phase. But to your point, this is all natural of the ups and downs, and there's so many opportunities. We're pretty deterministic about the future. Now it's just about shaping that future and what reality looks like beyond, the numbers and declines of either tokens or stock prices and so on and so forth. But switching gears to kind of the last topic, Sarah, of this wonderful conversation, which I feel like we can go on for a few more hours at least. One of the things that, in our opinion, the metaverse introduces as an opportunity is to build a more diverse version of the internet, a more inclusive version of the internet, right? And that means increasing the opportunities for women and non-binary individuals to build the metaverse and experiences in the metaverse. That includes minority and other populations, anywhere from Asia to Latin America to Africa, and essentially making sure that we're not really building a metaverse that is white and male dominated, which is to a large extent how the internet in the Western kind of civilization has evolved. And so we would love to get your perspective about that, and maybe more specifically, what it means to have been a female CEO as a CEO of a metaverse company in this industry, more broadly in crypto. And what do you think we need to continue and do to make sure that we enable a diverse inclusion of creators of all sorts in this new era?
Yeah, well, I think that this is a really interesting topic because, Web 2 platforms essentially concentrate power and the capacity to derive economic profit in, one entity. Whereas Web3 systems disperse that, and anybody who's owning the token can contribute and can monetize that, can enrich their lives and make stuff possible in their world. And I actually think that's super inclusive by design. In fact, it's probably why existing companies don't want it. So that to me is the real story here, is that by learning about this technology and not just the tech, this is a massively growing industry. So if you need a job, get into this space, right? Whether you're somebody who is a writer or an artist or a community organizer or somebody who does ops or, technologist, there's so much growth happening and it's flexible. You can, make your own mark on it, and it's, can be very enriching in your life, very lucrative, and kind of work around your own needs. Like, speaking particularly about women, flexible working can be hugely empowering for women. That's one of the key reasons why women don't kind of progress through to higher levels of the workplace in general. And we see, fewer women on boards and in senior management and so on, is that women take out time to care for children, or in fact, sometimes for parents. Generally, care tends to fall more to women. So by having more flexible options, but still at a really elite level where you can kind of, run something or, invent something, and it's, and you can do that from home, that's incredibly empowering for women. And I think it's incredibly empowering for anybody who wants to get involved in those systems today. So yeah, I'm actually super optimistic about that. I think that by design, that's why I got into blockchain in the first place, is it's much more democratic and much more inclusive in the sense that, you can get involved. Now, whether you end up being successful, I suppose, is still just down to hard work and the ability to take risk and all those things. But I think that the space is really inclusive, and that's been my experience. I think it's a brilliant job for people to get into, and I really encourage people, honestly, like, most companies in this space are hiring, and hiring fast. So that's huge opportunity.
Well, this is a wonderful note to kind of wrap on. Saro McKenna, CEO of Dacoco, creators of AlienWorlds. Thank you so much for being with us. It was a fantastic conversation. Cannot wait to bring it to life tomorrow and publish it and bring it to our audience. So, Saro, thank you so much.
Matthew, Yon, it was brilliant being here. Thanks for having me. Great show.